You've probably seen this claim. Ancient humans had kids at 12. It's everywhere. Comment sections, trivia lists, other videos just like this one. Here's the problem. It's not true. Or at least not in the way most people think. That's what makes this story so fascinating. The claim didn't appear because archaeologists discovered some shocking secret. It survived because several different facts slowly became tangled together. Each fact was real. The conclusion wasn't. Somewhere along the way, a complicated story became a simple sentence. And simple sentences travel much faster than complicated truths. That's why millions of people now repeat it with complete confidence, imagining a brutal prehistoric world where nobody lived very long, where childhood barely existed, where becoming a parent at 12 wasn't unusual. It feels believable. That's exactly the problem. History has a habit of rewarding stories that feel true, not stories that actually are.
Imagine standing beside a campfire 20,000 years ago. The sun has disappeared behind the hills. The air is getting colder. Tomorrow's meal isn't guaranteed. Every decision matters. Every mistake carries consequences. Nobody would describe that life as easy. But difficult lives don't automatically create shorter childhoods. That assumption seems obvious today, yet nobody asked whether the evidence actually supported it. For a long time, scientists couldn't answer that question either. Prehistoric people left no diaries, no birth certificates, no family photographs, no written records explaining when people married or started families. They left something else. Bones. Thousands of them, scattered across caves, river valleys, ancient campsites, and forgotten graves. At first, those bones seemed almost silent. They could reveal height, sometimes disease, sometimes violent injuries, but they couldn't tell complete stories. Or so researchers believed. Then archaeology changed. New techniques appeared. Genetics transformed the field. Medical science joined the investigation. Ancient skeletons stopped being collections of old bones. They became biological records, each one preserving tiny clues about growth, health, nutrition, injury, even age. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. Not from one skeleton, not from one archaeological site, but from thousands of discoveries collected over generations. The picture was remarkably consistent, and it didn't resemble the popular myth.
In fact, the deeper scientists looked, the stranger the story became. Because the first thing they discovered wasn't about pregnancy, it wasn't about marriage, it wasn't even about childhood. It was about one number. A number almost everyone has heard, repeated in classrooms, documentaries, museums, and history books. Ancient people only lived to around 30 years old. That single statistic shaped the way millions imagine the ancient world. The problem is that almost nobody stopped to ask what the number actually meant, and that simple mistake may have created one of history's most persistent myths. That number isn't wrong, it's misunderstood. When archaeologists say life expectancy was around 30 years, they aren't describing the average adult. They're describing the average newborn. Those are two very different things. Imagine a small prehistoric community. 10 children are born during the same generation. Several die before reaching their 5th birthday. One dies during adolescence. The others survive into middle age. A few even grow old. The average suddenly drops, not because adults usually died at 30, but because childhood was incredibly dangerous. That's the part most people never hear. Ancient life expectancy was crushed by infant mortality. Disease spread quickly. Clean water was rare. Medicine didn't exist. A simple infection could become fatal. The first years of life were the greatest challenge. Survive them, and your chances improve dramatically. That pattern appears again and again. Not in one country, not in one culture, but across prehistoric populations around the world.
Archaeologists regularly uncover skeletons belonging to older adults. Some lived long enough to lose nearly every tooth. Others developed severe arthritis after decades of physical work. Many survived broken bones that healed years before death. Those injuries tell an important story. Healing takes time, sometimes months, sometimes years. These weren't people disappearing before adulthood. They lived long enough for their bodies to recover. Some even required help from others. A badly broken leg doesn't heal alone. Someone gathered food. Someone carried water. someone kept them alive. That single fact changes how we imagine prehistoric life. It wasn't just survival, it was cooperation. Communities invested in people who could no longer hunt. That doesn't happen if everyone dies at 30.
But the misunderstanding didn't stop there. Once people accepted the number, they started filling in the gaps. If adults only reached 30, they must have become parents incredibly young. It sounds reasonable, except biology doesn't work that way. Reaching puberty isn't the same as becoming physically mature. It isn't even the same as becoming an adult. Modern medicine understands that distinction very well. So do evolutionary biologists. Human bodies continue developing long after puberty begins. The brain keeps changing, bones continue growing, the pelvis continues widening. That process didn't suddenly appear in modern society. It has been part of human biology for hundreds of thousands of years. Which raises another question. If prehistoric bodies developed much like ours, why do so many people picture 12-year-old mothers? The answer doesn't come from archaeology. It comes from history. More specifically, from a period that arrived thousands of years after the Stone Age ended. Somehow, stories from castles and kingdoms became mixed with stories from caves and campfires. And once those two worlds became tangled together, separating fact from fiction became surprisingly difficult. Scientists have studied puberty for generations. The results surprised almost everyone. Ancient children didn't usually mature earlier. In many cases, they matured later. That sounds backwards. Most people expect hardship to speed everything up. The human body often does the opposite. Growing takes energy. Puberty takes energy. When food becomes scarce, the body starts making difficult decisions. Survival comes first. Growth can wait. Modern medicine sees this pattern repeatedly. Children experiencing long-term malnutrition often enter puberty later than healthy children. Chronic illness can have the same effect, so can repeated infections. Ancient communities faced all three. Food shortages weren't unusual. Parasites were common. Disease spread without modern medicine. These weren't conditions that encouraged faster development. They often delayed it. Scientists even have a name for the opposite trend, the secular trend. Over the last 2 centuries, the average age of puberty has gradually fallen, not because humans evolved overnight, but because living conditions improved. Children received better nutrition, cleaner water, better health care, fewer serious infections. Their bodies had enough energy to grow faster. That change has been documented across many populations. It's one of the clearest biological shifts in modern history. Now, think about what that means. If improved health moved puberty earlier, poorer health probably moved it later. Suddenly, the internet myth starts looking upside down. The evidence doesn't point toward widespread motherhood at 12. It points toward childhood lasting longer than many people imagine. But even puberty doesn't answer our original question, because humans are unusual, very unusual. Compared with almost every other animal, our childhood lasts an incredibly long time. A foal can stand within hours. A deer runs beside its mother within days. Young chimpanzees develop much faster than human children. We don't. Our brains keep growing for years. They consume enormous amounts of energy. Learning becomes part of survival. Children don't simply grow stronger. They spend years learning thousands of tiny skills. How to recognize dangerous plants, how to track animals, how to read weather, how to cooperate, how to solve problems, how to survive. Evolution didn't accidentally make childhood longer. It rewarded it. Because knowledge became one of humanity's greatest advantages. A child who spent more years learning often became a more successful adult. That success meant better survival, better parenting, healthier children. The cycle continued. Which creates another mystery. If humans benefit from a long childhood, what did that childhood actually look like before civilization? The answer comes from people whose way of life still resembles our distant past more closely than anyone else.
Medieval Europe has quietly shaped the way many people imagine the ancient world. Most don't even realize it. They hear one historical fact, then apply it to a completely different time. You've probably heard this one too. Girls could legally marry at 12. At first, that sounds like the missing piece. Maybe that's where the myth came from. In reality, it only creates another misunderstanding. A legal minimum isn't the same as the normal age. Those are two completely different things. History is full of laws that most people never followed. Marriage was no exception. Across much of medieval Europe, families often waited, not because they wanted to, but because survival demanded it. A new household needed food, land, animals, shelter. A family couldn't survive on tradition alone. It needed resources. That's why historians studying parish records found something surprising. Many women married years after the legal minimum. Late teens were common, early 20s weren't unusual. The exact age depended on where they lived, on wealth, on opportunity, not simply biology. Even if every medieval girl had married at 12, it still wouldn't explain prehistoric humans. The two worlds were separated by thousands of years. Different climates, different economies, different beliefs, different ways of living. One society built castles. The other followed migrating animals across open landscapes. Comparing them directly makes as much sense as comparing astronauts with Roman soldiers. They were both human. Almost everything else was different.
Anthropologists understand this better than anyone. That's why they rarely use medieval records to explain prehistoric behavior. Instead, they look for evidence left by prehistoric people themselves, and that's where the investigation becomes far more interesting. Because bones don't care about myths. Bones don't repeat stories. Bones record biology. Every skeleton preserves a timeline. Tiny changes happen throughout childhood. More changes appear during adolescence. Others continue into adulthood. To an untrained eye, they're almost invisible. To a bioarchaeologist, they're incredibly valuable. Growth plates slowly close as the body matures. Teeth appear in predictable stages. Bones fuse together over many years. Even the pelvis changes shape throughout adolescence. These aren't random events, they're biological milestones, and they happen in the same general order today as they did thousands of years ago. That's what makes skeletons so powerful. They allow scientists to estimate how far someone's body had developed, not perfectly, but surprisingly well. When researchers compared hundreds of prehistoric skeletons, one pattern kept appearing. Adolescence wasn't missing. It wasn't dramatically shortened. It existed, just as it does today. Young teenagers were still growing. Their bodies were still changing. Their skeletons weren't fully mature. That doesn't mean pregnancy never happened. Biology makes pregnancy possible after puberty begins. But possible isn't the same as typical, and it certainly isn't the same as ideal. That's a distinction the internet almost never makes.
Because once puberty enters the conversation, another popular assumption appears. People imagine ancient children matured much earlier than modern children. That sounds reasonable too, until scientists measured it. To understand ancient childhood, scientists sometimes look beyond ancient bones. They also study people whose lifestyles still resemble our distant past. Not because these communities are living fossils. They aren't. They're modern people living in modern countries. But some still practice hunting and gathering, and that offers valuable clues. One well-known example is the Hadza of Tanzania. Another is the Juhwanzi of southern Africa. Anthropologists have spent decades learning from both communities. The first thing they noticed wasn't early parenthood. It was long childhood. Children weren't expected to become adults overnight. Instead, they learned gradually. Young boys followed experienced hunters, not to hunt immediately, but to watch, to listen, to understand. Young girls learned practical skills through daily life, gathering food, preparing meals, caring for younger children, working alongside older relatives. Nobody handed them a textbook. The landscape became their classroom. Adults rarely forced constant instruction. Children explored. They experimented. They copied older people. And little by little, they became capable adults. Anthropologists call this apprenticeship through participation. Children learn by joining real life, not by sitting apart from it. That process takes years, sometimes more than a decade. Because surviving as a hunter-gatherer requires far more than physical strength. You must recognize hundreds of edible plants. You must understand animal behavior. You must remember seasonal changes. You must cooperate with others. You must earn trust. Those aren't skills a 12-year-old masters overnight. They're built through experience, one season at a time, generation after generation.
Then researchers noticed something else. Children weren't raised only by their parents. Grandparents played an enormous role. So did aunts, uncles, older siblings, friends.
human families have always been unusually cooperative. Evolutionary biologists even proposed an explanation. It's called the grandmother hypothesis. The idea is surprisingly simple. Humans often live long after having children. That's unusual in the animal kingdom. Older adults continue helping their families. Grandmothers gather food, share knowledge, watch young children. Their experience increases the chances that grandchildren survive. Over thousands of generations, that support may have become one of humanity's greatest advantages. Suddenly, childhood makes more sense. If children have many adults helping them, they don't need to become independent immediately. They have time to learn, time to grow, time to develop. That's exactly what researchers continue seeing across cultures. Which brings us back to the original claim. If long childhood helped humans survive, why does the internet still insist everyone became parents at 12? The answer has less to do with history and far more to do with the way stories spread. The internet has always rewarded simple stories. Not accurate stories, simple ones. Ancient humans had children at 12. You can understand it in 5 seconds, it sounds shocking, it sounds believable, and it spreads before anyone asks for evidence. The real answer is harder to fit into a headline. Life expectancy was lowered by enormous infant mortality, medieval marriage laws were confused with prehistoric life, ancient skeletons reveal long periods of growth, nutrition often delayed puberty instead of accelerating it. Hunter-gatherer children spent years learning before reaching full independence. None of those facts sound as dramatic alone. Together, they tell a completely different story. Does that mean no 12-year-old ever became pregnant? No. History almost never deals in absolutes. Across thousands of years and countless communities, rare cases almost certainly happened, just as they still do today. But rare isn't normal, and normal is what the original claim tries to describe. When anthropologists study entire populations instead of isolated possibilities, they don't find evidence that prehistoric humans routinely became parents at 12. What they find is something far more interesting. Human childhood has always been unusually long. Our species invested time in learning, time in cooperation, time in developing skills that no other animal needed. That investment changed everything. It helped small groups survive impossible environments. It helped knowledge pass from one generation to the next. And eventually, it helped build civilizations. That's the part the myth completely ignores. It treats childhood like wasted time. Evolution treated childhood like an advantage. The longer humans learned, the better humans survived. That's why our children spend years watching before leading, listening before teaching, learning before raising families of their own. That pattern stretches back far beyond written history. Ancient bones support it. Living hunter-gatherer societies reflect it. Evolution helps explain it. 3 completely different fields, one remarkably consistent conclusion. And maybe that's the biggest lesson hidden inside this myth. History isn't usually destroyed by lies. It's often distorted by oversimplification. One statistic loses its context. One historical fact gets moved into the wrong century. One confident sentence replaces decades of research. Before long, the myth becomes more famous than the evidence. So the next time someone confidently says, ancient humans had kids at 12, you'll know why the claim sounds convincing, you'll know where it came from, and you'll know why scientists don't accept it as the normal story of our past. Because ancient humans weren't simply trying to grow up faster, they were doing something far more important. They were learning, adapting, cooperating, passing knowledge from one generation to the next. The same process that eventually led to us.